I thank the organizers for inviting me to this auspicious occasion to make a presentation. Let me tell you that I value it so much, and it's great. Reflecting on the subject of interreligious cooperation, religious freedom and social stability, I'd like to premise my short remark first on the fact that today religion and the faith community is under siege. It appears to me like religion is at the center of the circumference, and people on the edges are asking existential questions. Why religion? What is the purpose? What value has it added to our lives? Are we not better off without religion? Why the tension? Is God there at all? Does he exist? Why are religious communities antagonistic of one another? These are the questions that, to my mind, the religious community must come together and answer. Otherwise, the increasing wave of secularism is already pushing religion and even God to the edges. And justly so, people are tired. I'm going to speak from the background of my experience as a Nigerian, as an imam, as a member of the Nigeria Interreligious Council. But first and foremost, interreligious dialogue and cooperation. As people of different faiths coming to a mutual understanding and respect that allows them to live and cooperate with each other in spite of their differences. It is an arrangement of cooperative and positive interaction between people of different traditions at both the individual and institutional levels. Each party remains true to their religious convictions while respecting the rights of others to practice their faiths freely. This, theoretically, is the definition of interreligious dialogue and cooperation. Our experience in Nigeria is that though there is a Nigeria Interreligious Council, which is supposed, among others, to ensure that there is an increased mutual understanding and good relations, especially between Muslims and Christians. By the way, in Nigeria, Muslims and Christians are evenly, balanced. Muslims constitute about 65% of the population, Christians about the rest. There is nobody in Nigeria, at least officially, that does not belong to either the Islamic or the Christian faith. Everyone in Nigeria is religious. So I can say Nigeria is a deeply religious country, deeply religious. It's even remarked that Nigeria is the most religious country in the world and the happiest set of human beings on the surface of the earth. Whether this is true or not, I may not be able to say here now. Nigeria is a thoroughly pluralistic society. Nigeria is divided into zones, geographical zones, geopolitical zones. You have the north that is predominantly Muslims. You have the southwest where you have, Muslims and Christians almost equal. You have the east where it is predominantly Christians and other adherents of the faith. Now, in the southwest where I come from, we have more than 200 different religions. And I want to underline, 200 different religions among the Yorubas. The Yorubas are either officially Muslims or Christians, but traditionally they are either Shango worshippers, Ogun worshippers, Obatala worshippers, and a host of others. In one family, you can find the head of the family belongs to Oshu. The mother of the house may be an Ifa worshipper, and they live peacefully. There has never in history been an incidence of antagonism or conflict or violence. So coming from this background, you wonder why you get the kind of news out of Nigeria, especially of Boko Haram, and this is what we're going to do. Now, the cooperative and positive interaction between people of different traditions at both the individual and institutional levels is what the Nigeria Interreligious Council is set up to do. Each party remains true to their religious convictions while respecting the rights of others to practice their faith freely. Now, recently, in our country, Nigeria, the news had been that of violence, religious extremism, the radicalization of the younger elements, especially through the phenomenon of the Boko Haram. The Muslim and the Christian community and the leadership of these faith communities have officially been working together. But unfortunately, it has not produced the kind of results that will lead to social stability, peace, peaceful coexistence, and harmony that is desirable from this kind of an arrangement. We could ask, why? Starting from Jos, for those who follow Nigeria closely, where there has been an outbreak of so-called religious violence through Bauchi to Maiduguri in the northeast of Nigeria. The reason has been far from religion itself. It has been more social, economic, ethnic, and political, rather than the religious differences between the Nigerian Muslims. In the southwestern states of Nigeria, every family has Muslim members, Christian members, and people who belong to traditional faith. They have lived together peacefully over the years. They celebrate festivals together. They share in social and community work. By the way, Nigeria is officially a secular country, constitutionally, even if it is practically a multi-religious society, a multi-religious country. And this is a huge debate in Nigeria between Nigeria being a secular state and a multi-religious state where each religious community have the freedom to practice their faith, to express their religious identity. In fact, Nigeria has a plurality of laws. In the north of Nigeria, you have the penal code, and in the south of Nigeria, you have the criminal code. The penal code is informed mainly by the Muslim personal law, which is a derivative of the Sharia law. It is called Islamic personal law. In the north, also, you have the Sharia courts. Sharia courts of appeal handle Islamic personal law matters, matters relating to marriage, to divorce, to custody of children, to inheritance, and the rest. This has been the arrangement since the independence, and it has been a very peaceful arrangement. The government seeks to regulate relation until the politicization of religious sentiments, the hijacking of religious sentiments, religious convictions, ethnic discontent that is exploiting religion as a vehicle of the manifestation of the inherent dissatisfaction that is arising from the inequalities, especially by the elites. Generally in Nigeria, there is relative religious freedom. There is no part of Nigeria that is exclusively Muslim. There is no part of Nigeria that is exclusively Christian. You find Muslims in the north, you find Christians in the north of Nigeria, and until very recently, due to political reasons, they practice the religion without let and hindrance. And you find Muslims in the southern and the eastern part, mainly the eastern part of Nigeria. They practice the religion. Igbos, who are mainly from the east, who are mainly Christians, Catholics, live predominantly in the north. And they have churches. They practice the religion freely. Now, this now takes us to the issue of the connection between interreligious cooperation, interreligious dialogue, religious freedom, and social stability. Of course, it could be better in Nigeria today, politically, economically, and socially. The social cohesion is challenged. Relative political instability, gross economic underdevelopment as a result of corruption. Now, because it is a predominantly religious community, this discontent found expression in religion and religious expression, by the way. Distinction is made between religious experience and religious expression, where religious experience is the conviction of the faith and its practice, and religious expression is the outward show of religiosity. In Nigeria, you have, on an average, in a street, you could have 50 churches. In a town, you could have thousands of churches and mosques. Sundays, Fridays, days of worship, and you will think it is, sometimes you go to Nigeria on Sunday, you will mistake it for Rome because of the number of people that attend. But how much of conviction, of faith are there? That is a question that must be answered. In summary, I want to say, like 137 Muslim leaders and scholars from across the world wrote a letter in 2007 to the Christian leaders. It says, Muslims and Christians together make up over half the world's population. Without peace and justice between these two religious communities, there can be no meaningful peace. The future of the world depends on peace between Muslims and Christians. These relation between Muslims and Christians depends largely on ensuring justice and fair play. When politicians get involved in religion, like our experience in the last general elections in Nigeria, which is the most bigoted, which is the most religiously dividing and divisive elections that we have had in Nigeria. The campaign is candidate A, a Muslim, candidate B, a Christian, whereas the underlying reality is election to high offices is not about faith. It's about the ability to deliver on election promises. Like the leader of the Muslim community in Nigeria once said, the parable of the mosquito. The mosquito is a friend and an enemy of all. The mosquito goes overnight to the church and bites the Christian, and early in the morning, it migrates to the mosque and bites the Muslim. So taking perhaps the malarian parasite from the Christian and injecting into the Muslim. It doesn't discriminate. There is no Muslim blood. There is no Muslim organ that cannot fit into a Christian. A Christian needing blood transfusion, for those who believe in transfusion, will not ask a doctor, what blood are you giving me? Is it the blood of a Muslim? If it is the blood of a Muslim, I don't want it. At that critical moment, it is humanity. It is blood. It is only to cross-match and ensure that it matches. It doesn't really matter whether the blood is that of a Muslim or a Christian or a Sikh or a Jew or whatever. What matters is that someone needs blood. The same thing goes to organ donation. If somebody is critically ill and there is a donor, the question to ask is not whether the donor is a Christian or Muslim, a Sikh, or someone who is not affiliated. The question to ask is, does it fit? And if it fits, it goes. But largely, our experience as a faith community in Nigeria is that majority of people in charge of religion have nothing to do with religion. They either lack integrity altogether or they are religious contractors. If they are not contractors, they are religious consultants, politicians masquerading as religious leaders. To a very great extent, there are monumental changes beginning to manifest in Nigeria today. The people, especially through the last election, have come together to speak with one voice. It is not about religious affiliation. It is about integrity. It is about probity. And we're beginning to witness changes where Muslims vote irrespective of their religious affiliation, and Christians also vote irrespective of their affiliation. To a very large extent, we do not have some of the problems of religion as it is peculiar to other climes. And, you know, we do not have problem with same-sex marriage. Universally, you know, the community, the faith community in Nigeria have said, that's why I was asking about social stability and social change. It is, for us, religiously stable to restrict marriage within the traditional definition of union between a man and a woman. And we're all right, we're fine. Muslims, Christians, we're all right with this. And will it be wrong for us to choose to remain like this if we do not want to change? Or must change be imposed on us? I think these are questions for reflection. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Our second speaker is Father Brian Lucas, General Secretary of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. Father Lucas is General Secretary. He was Financial Administrator and Secretary of the Archdiocese of Sydney and acted as media spokesman. He has postgraduate academic qualifications in law, theology, and general studies. Awarded a Churchill Fellowship, he undertook a program of studies in pastoral communication at Gregorian University, Rome. He is a graduate of the Australian Catholic University, member of the Australian Taxation Office Not-for-Profit Advisory Group, member of the Australian Treasury Working Party on tax concessions for not-for-profit organizations, a director of Catholic Church Insurances Limited, and co-author of the Church Administration Handbook.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the privilege of being here. I have a few pictures, and I'm sorry if some of the formatting makes them a little blurry, but I'll leave you to make what you'd like of that first picture. That's probably the principle upon which we would all like to operate. We are all human, not so simple. This is one of the tensions and problems we have in Australia at the moment. We have now, because of patterns of migration, some weakening of what we would call social stability. Just to give you the background in Australia of the religious makeup for those who are not so familiar with it, the largest individual denomination is Catholic at 25% of the population, followed by Anglican 17%. Then you move to the smaller religions, for those interested, the Church of Latter-day Saints, 59,000 people, 0.3%, very close to the Salvation Army, 60,000 at also 0.3%, Seventh-day Adventists, 63,000, 0.3%. To put that in a broader context of the percentages of other faiths, Hinduism 1.3%, Islam 2.2%, Judaism 0.5%. The changes with respect to religious demographics and particularly more recent migration from people from Islamic background has caused some sense of tension and conflict, and that picture there represents a group of people, and there are a number of them: Reclaim Australia, the Australian Defence League, United Patriots Front. They like to hold protest rallies, and whenever there is a group of people protesting against racism, some of them will turn up to point a different point of view. Tragically, in December 2014, a lone gunman, man Haron Monis, held hostage 10 customers and 8 employees of a chocolate cafe in Martin Place in the heart of the business district of Sydney. He and 2 hostages died when police stormed the cafe. Police treated it at the time as a terrorist attack, and there's a coroner's inquiry at the moment. Tim Wilson referred to an incident that occurred after I left to come to this conference. A 15-year-old went to the mosque dressed in black robes, changed his clothes. He had a handgun. Where a 15-year-old in Australia gets a handgun, I do not know. Our gun laws are very strict. He waits outside the police centre at Parramatta, a suburb 30 or so kilometres west of Sydney. A 58-year-old employee, a finance officer of the police, comes out, and the young man approaches him, steps up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. That was last Friday in Sydney. This is something unheard of in our culture and is a cause of enormous tension and conflict. Questions will be asked about all aspects of how a 15-year-old can become so radicalised apparently so quickly. But that then gives rise, of course, to reaction. Could I just give you one example of the sort of polarisation that type of incident creates? And this goes back to the 2014 incident I mentioned before. This columnist, Paul Sheehan, to the right of centre in the Sydney Morning Herald, said this. He says, Muslims are overrepresented in Goulburn Supermax prison and were prominent in an outbreak of violence last Sunday when prisoners reacted to a clampdown of security. The cry of Allah Akbar, the rallying call of jihadists, was reportedly shouted by a number of inmates as they threatened guards. Since the shootings at Lakemba Police Station, there have been numerous terror plots, terror convictions and acts of social intimidation by Muslims in Australia, undercutting the widely preferred mantra of victimology of Muslims in Australia. That type of comment becomes the reaction to particular individual incidents. And of course, strong emotions hamper any sort of sense of proper and respectful dialogue. We have a problem where groups such as this seek to oppose the building of mosques. Issues to do with proper town planning and so on are totally confused, as the minority group see that they are being disadvantaged by a majority group who believe, rationally or irrationally, that somehow their lifestyle is at risk. The Australian government some time ago proposed a regional interfaith dialogue together with Indonesia, the Philippines and New Zealand. Sister Catherine will say something about that because she participated in it. This was an opportunity by the Australian government to engage, of course, with Indonesia, which is our closest neighbour and the largest Muslim country in the world, to build bridges, to see what we have in common and what can be done by way of regional dialogue. Then at a micro level, the Bishop of Toowoomba, and if you're wondering, if you can't identify which of those characters is the bishop, he's the fella there with less hair. The Bishop of Toowoomba is a small city to the west of Brisbane. In order to build good relations between the young people from the Catholic community and the Muslim community, organised a football match. He didn't organise for the Christians to play against the Muslims, he split them so that they were half each. Christians and Muslims in one team that was called Harmony and then in the other team that was called Peace. I understand that peace beat harmony on the day. It's simply an example at the micro level of an opportunity to build and foster dialogue. I come now to the second example I wanted to speak about, which is the question of same-sex marriage. Much of it has already been dealt with by Tim, and I would broadly agree with the approach that he has taken. One of the issues I think that we have in trying to have a sensible discussion about the question of marriage is to find a language that can adequately respect the different perspectives. And this is by no means easy. There are difficulties even within individual faith communities. There are nuances and subtleties, and there are groups within a religion that would take a liberal view. There would be others that would take a more conservative view. We could divide people into orthodox or liberal or reformed or whatever particular group we would like. What we have to understand, however, is that the compromise, and Tim didn't like the use of that word compromise, but essentially I think it is a compromise. We have to celebrate diversity in a proper and true sense, but celebrating diversity also involves respecting people who take a particular view about marriage. That was a point of view about marriage by a particular group, the Marriage Alliance. More to it than you think. What are the overall consequences? Will we get to a stage, for example, in Catholic schools where it will not be possible to present a particular view about marriage? We have the Archbishop of Hobart at the moment under siege by a transgender a person from the Green Party who wants to aspire to the Green Party, who is taking a view that a document which the Australian bishops produced, Don't Mess with Marriage, that particular document, this person says, is contrary to the anti-discrimination law, and the particular view taken there is that the bishop is in breach of the law for teaching what would always be regarded as Catholic doctrine. The Mormons have taken an initiative in Australia to, I think, which is a very good initiative, and that's to present a research project that will try to engage with the contribution that religious organisations make, and that's something we need to work on. The Bishops' Conference has put together an Interfaith Women's Fellowship, also to try to bring together people who can understand and dialogue respectfully. That's probably where we finish. Religious freedom, faith, worship, conscience, pluralism, all of that we need to work together as best as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. The final of our three speakers is Sister Catherine Jones, the chair of the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Committee for Interfaith Relations. She is a sister of the Society of Mary, a Roman Catholic congregation of religious sisters in the Marist tradition. A native of New Zealand, Sister Catherine has engaged in missionary work in the Central Pacific, North and West Africa, as well as France, and currently in New Zealand. After university studies in Fiji and Washington, D.C., she has been involved in education and interfaith relations for over 40 years. Sister Catherine has held leadership responsibilities in her congregation and is currently chair of the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Committee for Interfaith Relations. Sister Catherine.
Thank you very much. One of the symbols of New Zealand is the kiwi. That is the bird, not the fruit or the shoe polish. It is nocturnal, flightless, protected as it's in danger of extinction. What a great national symbol. Well, I'm one of them who has taken flight at your gracious invitation to be part of this symposium. Thank you for this privilege and for your very warm welcome to Salt Lake City and Provo. I'd also like to acknowledge the co-presenters today, Father Brian Lucas and Sheik Abdur-Rahman Ahmad. It is a joy to share with you. This morning I would like to reflect with you on interreligious freedom and collaboration in New Zealand, with some examples of current practice and some challenges that face us on the road ahead. But first of all, once a historian, you are tainted for life. And I'd just like to give a little brief historical background to religious freedom in New Zealand today. The Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840 between the Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, and the Crown, is the founding document of New Zealand. For many years, it was the closest we ever had to a written constitution. The fourth article of this Treaty of Waitangi guarantees religious freedom. The article was added to the Maori text of the treaty at the request of the Roman Catholic Bishop Jean-Baptiste Pompallier, who was present at the proceedings. The translation reads, "The Governor says that the several faiths, beliefs of England, of the Wesleyans, of Rome, and also of Maori custom shall alike be protected by him." End of quote. And we need to recall the historical context, aware that there was no love lost between Catholic Bishop Pompallier and the British colonisers. The memory of Waterloo in 1815 was as fresh as yesterday. The fourth article then was designed more to protect the rights of Roman Catholics in the face of a dominant Anglican and Protestant majority. Over the years, it has been interpreted as an article protecting religious freedom in general, and in particular, the religion and the customs of the indigenous Maori people. The Catholic Church still continues to take this responsibility seriously. Church statements in 1989 and 1995, at the time of the sesquicentenary of the treaty, continue this theme. The treaty is described as a covenant, a taonga in Māori, with all the depth of the biblical notion of covenant. And today this entails a commitment to reconciliation and the restoration of confiscated land. The treaty has been observed in the breach. And we have a long history of betrayal of the fine principles of this Treaty of Waitangi, not only with regard to land, but with regard to language, to culture, and traditional Maori religious values. The Waitangi Tribunal, over the last 40 years, has achieved some measure of healing and national reconciliation. This covenant, in the words of the bishops in 1990, is also the moral basis for the presence of all other peoples in New Zealand. All other immigrants and refugees who have arrived since 1840. And we have had to remind our Prime Minister of that recently. New Zealand today is a multicultural, secular, democratic society, just over 4.5 million, a very small city by American standards. Freedom of religious belief is guaranteed by law, for example, the New Zealand Bill of Rights in 1990, and an aspirational document, the New Zealand Statement on Religious Diversity of 2007, and subsequent documents. Over half of New Zealanders identify themselves as being Christian, the main denominations being Anglican, Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, and Pentecostal. In recent years, there has been a significant increase in numbers of non-Christian. The landscape of religion, and therefore of religious freedom, is changing. Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Sikh make up the most significant minority religions. According to the last census in 2013, and following the pattern of the previous one, approximately 1/3 of the population today indicate no religion, and they too claim, and rightfully so, religious freedom. Just a couple of comments about current religious collaboration. The days of fierce intolerance of other faiths and religions, fortunately, are over. Even in my parents' lifetime, I can remember them talking about advertisements in the paper that said, Catholics need not apply. And my father had to get special permission from the bishop to attend Otago University, fierce fortress of Presbyterians. I am not sure if this tolerance is necessarily out of respect. My suspicion is that it's more a question of indifference or apathy. Religion, so what? Let's face it, the All Blacks are much more important. The most visible forms of religious collaboration are in social services and practical projects such as night shelter services, environmental projects, advocacy on behalf of the most vulnerable, and particularly in refugee resettlement. The picture is actually encouraging and hope-filled, especially in the light of several threats to religious freedom that I would now like to mention. There are two major categories I'd like to comment on. One is bioethics, and the second is on social concerns. Both Mr. Wilson and Father Brian Lucas have spoken about the same-sex marriage discussion which is underway in Australia. Well, New Zealand is a couple of steps ahead. With the Redefinition of Marriage Act of 2014. Please note the title. It's a redefinition of marriage. And the basic comment is, let's get on with it. We live with it. But I would like to acknowledge the contribution of a Latter-day Saints Member of Parliament, who wasn't elected because he was Latter-day Saints, Sua William Sio, Labour Party member for Mangere in South Auckland, who led the opposition to the bill during the second and third stages, and in particular the advocacy he did in collaboration with other faith communities, not only Christian, but also particularly with the Muslim community, to ensure that ministers of religion who are also marriage celebrants in New Zealand would not be forced to conduct same-sex marriages. It wasn't all that clear in the earlier drafts. The bill has gone through, it has become Act, and we live with it. It's interesting that the numbers of people applying for same-sex marriage as an upgrade, in inverted commas, of the civil union which they contracted since 2006 is not as high as originally anticipated. I put in brackets, and I'll say it, except for the marriage tourism, particularly of Australians who come to New Zealand to get married under New Zealand law. A second area of concern about religious freedom is the obligation on doctors and nurses to assist at abortions. The law allowing abortions in New Zealand up to 20 weeks with 2 certifying consultants was passed in 1977. Up till now, there was a provision for doctors and nurses to refuse to participate in such procedures, and this has generally been upheld. Most recently, however, there has been controversy around the question of parental consent, focused on the case of a girl under the age of 16 to have an abortion. And rather like the question that Father Brian raised about a 15-year-old with a gun, we would raise the same question about parental consent for a girl under the age of 16 to have an abortion. The End-of-Life Choice Bill is back on the table in the New Zealand Parliament. And earlier this year, Lucretia Seals, a young lawyer in her early 40s with terminal brain cancer, took her case to court to ensure that her doctor, if asked to assist with euthanasia, would not be prosecuted. The court, as you will imagine, upheld the current law by which the doctor would be prosecuted. Lucretia Seals died within 3 hours of hearing the result of that court case, of natural causes, surrounded in hospice care by her family. Her case and the language around it was highly emotional, but now is the time, as several speakers have already said, to find a common language around which we can conduct this debate around the End-of-Life Choice Bill. Another area which is not so common but is simmering away is the questions of eugenics and development aid. There is a certain pressure on some development agencies, and in some cases they agree to it, and others they resist, to include and to enforce birth control measures in exchange for development aid. In the area of social concerns, we have this peculiar legislation in New Zealand called Easter trading. You might say it's a relic of the past, but it is originally was designed as a protection of family time, with shops closed on Good Friday, Easter Sunday, Christmas Day, as well, of course, Anzac Day. But it is an indicator of social change that there is an increasing demand for 24-hour shopping. Another area of great concern in New Zealand is the high rate of incarceration, sadly disproportionate among the poor and ethnic minorities, including Maori and Pasifika peoples. There is a need for social change, particularly in our attitude towards incarceration and the uptake of systems of restorative justice. Also, care for those who are in prison. Earlier this year, the Latter-day Saints and the Catholic Church signed a memorandum of understanding about working together in prison chaplaincy, that we would alert each other to members of our respective faiths in need of chaplaincy services. And similar memoranda are being negotiated with members of other religions, particularly Muslim and Hindu. The situation of the 2 known Jewish people in prison has been addressed on an ad hoc basis. But I think you would appreciate the humour around the discovery that Catholics do not hold a monopoly on the prison population. Both Catholics and Mormons in prison have a strong sense of faith identity, even though some of them will say, well, I haven't been to church since I made my first communion, but I'm still a Catholic. And at its best is recognised as having potential for repentance and rehabilitation. A third area that I'd like to remember, and it's the final remark I would like to make about religious collaboration and religious freedom, is the welcome of refugees. The crisis in the Middle East, North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Europe is felt as far away as New Zealand. The current New Zealand government quota of UNHCR refugees stands at 750 and has not changed in over 30 years. There is growing pressure on the government to increase that quota and to allow for an emergency quota in order to receive some of the millions of people currently on the move. Some of the focus is those of the plight of those on Manus Island and in Nauru. There has been a mixed reaction. Solidarity and generosity on one hand, but on the other, fear and exclusion. Of greatest concern is the suggestion that Christians only may apply, a phrase that very thinly covers a latent Islamophobia in some sections of the New Zealand population. The New Zealand bishops have spoken out strongly about this in the name of religious freedom and our country's commitment to religious diversity. These challenges stress the need for all people of faith to work together to ensure that the dignity, the transcendent dignity of the human person in society, is upheld. There is a wide consensus amongst religious faiths that the human person is created in the image and likeness of God the Creator, the ultimate source of all life and love. For those of us who are Christian, this is framed within our belief in God as Trinity, a relational God, a God who invites us to live deeply in that relationship with God and with all other people and the whole of creation. The road lies ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Catherine. We have time now, approximately 15 minutes, for your questions. We'd like you, if you have a question, I will recognize you, and then would you please stand, state your name, the country of origin, and let's make sure, if we can, that you get a microphone. Do we have someone here with the microphone? Yes, we do. Okay, so, yes, right here. Please stand. Yes. This fellow in the middle. Yes. Would you please stand?
Okay, sir.
And introduce yourself.
Okay, sir. My name is Murtala Bidmos. I'm a professor of Islamic education and interreligious dialogue, University of Lagos, Nigeria. I am very pleased by the presentation from the Australia, because they have a kind of agitation and disagreement, but they are taking practical steps to take care of those things, like football match among the youth to create harmony and love and affection. But my question is this, Reverend Father, if you take such practical steps among the youth, what steps are you taking among the adults who are stakeholders in the society to bring them together? Because if you can achieve harmony among the youth, what about the elders in the society? For Abdur-Rahman Ahmad from Nigeria, the kind of practical steps that has been taken in Australia to stem the wave of insurgency or agitation, do you have similar steps taken in Nigeria, practical, pragmatic, to take care of agitation and disagreement in terms of religious freedom and discord? What kind of practical steps are you taking in Nigeria, like that of Australia? Now, for New Zealand, it appears that you don't have any significant religious agitation or insurgency. It appears things are relatively calm and peaceful, religiously speaking, which is very pleasant and commendable. But my worry is this. You talk about Islam, what is it? Maphobia. Islamophobia. Okay, this type of expression, what are you doing proactively to try to nip in the bud the possible violent expression of this feeling in the future? Right now, it is relatively calm, but do you foresee this type of feeling escalating? And if you foresee it, what are you doing proactively to nip it in the bud? Thank you.
Thank you. Father Brian.
One example that I had in the paper, the written paper, but time doesn't allow you to read everything, was an initiative the Australian bishops took in 2007 to draw together Jewish and Muslim leaders. So the 40 bishops spent a day, they used the theatrette of the New South Wales State Parliament and had representatives of the Jewish community and Muslim community. The kosher food was at one end, the halal food was at the other end. It was a day that I found very revealing. When I was practicing law, the firm I worked for was Jewish, so I had a fair enculturation into the Jewish way of thinking. And I knew many of the people who were there. And I was very touched when one of the Jewish representatives said that this was the first time in his life, and he was a middle-aged man, that he had ever spoken to a Muslim. That says something. So to bring people together to have that dialogue, but not without difficulty, because at lunchtime the Jewish group caucused. They were a little bit concerned that some of the things said before lunch, we had expert speakers from the Middle East and so on. Some of the things that were said about settlements and the Palestinian question they weren't quite comfortable with, and after lunch they wanted to make a few points about that. So dialogues, if they are to be genuine dialogues, have to be robust and have to be honest and have to be open, and the questions have to be faced. But putting in place the structures, which I think is your question, the structures for that dialogue is not very easy. And I'm very concerned because of these recent incidents, including the one a few days ago, that suspicions will will only further exacerbate, and it will be more difficult to put in place the structured dialogues. That they are in place. There is a formal structured dialogue in Australia between Christians, Jews and Muslims, but I'm not optimistic that the impact at what we would call the grassroots, how it affects the attitudes of the community generally, will be as positive as one would like it to be.
Sheik Ahmad.
Yeah. In 2011, the Nigeria Interreligious Council had a youth convention for 100 Muslim and Christian youth in Mina. 50 Muslim youth, 50 Christian youth. They were camped in Mina. Mina is in Niger State, in the northern part of Nigeria. And so many resource persons were invited to talk about interreligious harmony and cooperation. That's among youth. Among women also, there was the Khan women and the Form 1. The Nigeria Interreligious Council also organized a retreat, for them on the need to promote tolerance and peaceful coexistence. It is not just at the level of the youth. At the other levels, Muslims and Christians can, and the Nigerian Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs are cooperating in the fight against malaria, in the fight against HIV/AIDS. They have an organization that is called Nigeria Interfaith Action Against HIV and AIDS. Similarly, in terms of fighting corruption, they have a body that is called Nigeria Interfaith Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Recently, in the last election, there was also a coalition of Muslim and Christian leaders for peaceful election, violence-free election. This is in addition to Muslim and Christian leaders visiting troubled spots like Jos and Bauchi to jointly address the community on the need for peaceful coexistence and the need to avoid violence. These are practical steps that has been taken over the years, and it is continuing.
Thank you. Another question in the middle front here. I'm sorry, I apologize. Sister Catherine, I apologize. No, we have Sister Catherine's response first.
Just briefly.
My apologies.
I'd like to respond briefly to your question. Yes, we are certainly grateful that to date there is no religious insurgency in New Zealand. But one of the things that we are committed to as the Bishops' Committee for Interfaith Relations, which I'll leave there, is a close relationship with FIANZ, which is the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand, and IMAN, which is particularly for foreign-born Muslims in New Zealand. FIANZ are slightly different, is to support them, particularly in a time when they are under close surveillance by the New Zealand government, because they too are watching very carefully, particularly for disaffected youth who suddenly want to become Muslim. And so they propose now a 1-year stand down or investigation or kind of further reflection about why they want to become a Muslim. So it's a very formal support with the two major Muslim organisations in New Zealand, and also lots of educational programs encouraging visits to the mosque, particularly Islam Awareness Week and other invitations, for example, during Ramadan. and trying to help people in New Zealand to recognise, to name and to recognise why they're afraid and what are they afraid of. That's a fairly delicate issue, but it's one that needs to be addressed. And finally, we keep a fairly close eye on the isolated incidents of Islamophobia, for example, recently beating up a young Somali youth who was presumed to be Muslim and told to go back home where you belong. And also several incidents of verbal abuse of women who choose to wear visible signs of their Islamic faith. So there's some of the ways that we're trying to address Islamophobia in New Zealand.
Thank you. Now we can move to our question.
Thank you. Pelbinder Shergill from Canada. This is a question that I have for all the panel members. I understand the religious opposition to same-sex marriages being performed in churches or mosques or places of worship. I understand that opposition. I don't understand the opposition to civil same-sex marriage legislation. And I'm wondering how you can reconcile that opposition with the position, as Sister Jones had said, everyone, to ensure that the transcendent dignity of the human person is protected. Or as Gunnar Stolz had said yesterday, I think really beautifully, that religion is about welcoming the other in all his otherness as a brother. How do you reconcile your opposition to those types of statements that religious groups and yourselves really seem to accept?
Sister Jones, would you like to respond to that?
I'd like to respond to that. The civil union legislation went through in New Zealand in 2006. And the Catholic Church stance on that time was one of support, because it clarified some of the legal issues around people in a same-sex union, particularly areas of welfare, of inheritance, of shared property, and so on. And at the time, and I think at the time later, when the redefinition of marriage was being discussed, that we held that that legislation sufficiently covered the concerns of those in same-sex unions. The Catholic stance is also, you quoted me saying about the dignity, the transcendent human dignity of the person. Don't forget the last phrase, in society, that we are not just individuals floating on the planet by ourselves, but we are deeply connected to one another, and that the institution of family, of marriage in the traditional sense, is something which protects the basis of society. And we wouldn't see that in any way as a violation of the human rights and the dignity of people who choose to live in a same-sex union.
Father Lucas?
The position I'd articulate was very similar to what Tim Wilson articulated before. But it's not a simple question because of people. This is an emotional issue. It's not essentially a legal issue. In Australia, a same-sex couple have the same legal rights as a married couple for all practical purposes. So it's symbolic. For the same-sex couple, they say, we want the law to recognise our relationship as the same as the other relationship by calling it marriage. And the other side, the married people say, but we think our relationship is different to your relationship, and that has to do with the connection to family and the like. And while one group would say, and I use the word offended very neutrally, I don't mean offended in the offended sense, but they say, well, if you don't recognise us and call us married, we feel that way. And the others say, but if you change the meaning of what our relationships, we likewise feel. So you've got to work out what I call a compromise. You've got to work out how does the law deal with this. And the point I take, and I put a lawyer's hat on for a moment, there are many things in society, many sorts of relationships, many sorts of behaviours that people will take a view about the rightness and wrongness of, that the law has to be neutral about. There are according to the Hyde against Hyde definition of marriage, there are three elements of marriage in the common law. Between a man and a woman, to the exclusion of all others for life. But that's not really what the law is, because we allow divorce and we don't criminalise adultery. So then someone says, well, why are we so hung up about it being a man and a woman? So you say, from a purely legal point of view, how do we now find a solution? And I'm very attracted to Tim's parallel definitions. With this further qualification, which he's well articulated, and in my written paper I've quoted extensively from the piece that he wrote, that you respect the sensitivities on both sides. So you allow the people who have a view of marriage and religious marriage to be able to teach that. And you don't expose them to what's happened in Tasmania with the anti-discrimination law, where the Archbishop is being hauled before the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal for a document that teaches Catholic teaching on marriage. On the other side, of course, you've then got to say, well, where do we draw a line with respect to discrimination? So we say, all right, the clergy don't have to do same-sex marriage. What about the wedding cake maker? And I think Tim's put a position that I'd accept, but not everyone, I can tell you, in the Catholic Church would accept that view. There's a range, and some would say, well, this is the thin edge of the wedge. We accept Tim's position, but then what happens next day and the day after that and the day after that, as the alleged compromise gets watered down depending on which side of the debate is the more powerful. That I think is the fear, that it's not the end of the story and then it'll be just constant agitation, where my personal view is the worst thing we could have done is have a plebiscite, because I think all that's going to do is create acrimony and upset and weaken social stability. That would be my personal view.
Thank you. Sheik Ahmad?
Well, in Nigeria, there is almost a fear, almost a unanimity of opinion among people of different faiths, Muslims, Christians, and even traditional religious practitioners on the definition of marriage. And of course, the law in Nigeria defines marriage. That's the law now. And of course, I do believe that freedom cannot and is not absolute. Just like Professor Mustafa, answered the question when I was asking about the limits of freedom and who determines. And he says the determinant of the extent and the limit of the freedom of individuals and groups is the Constitution. So right now, the law in Nigeria defines marriage as the union between a man and a woman and protects that. And that remains the position. Of course, on top of that, the overwhelming majority of Nigerians also define marriage as the union between a man and a woman. And, they have very solid family values and the protection of the family. So if you ask why, that is the reason we are the way we are towards same-sex marriage and civil union. Thank you.
Thank you. The time has come. We have come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank our panelists again. As well as those of you who have come. Thank you very much.